Hello everyone, this is JonahTGP. Welcome back to my channel. And today we're going to be running Intel 8th Gen CPUs versus AMD Ryzen 1st Generation CPUs for the purposes of building a budget gaming PC to see what maybe you should buy if you're interested in building your own budget PC for the first time. Now typically these CPUs will have a good value just online, so let's see how they run against each other in both gaming and performance benchmarks. Alright, the first CPU that we have pulled up here is the i5-8100. It has 4 cores, 4 threads, 3.6 gigahertz clock speed. I was able to find one on eBay for $19.95. Next, we're looking at the i5-8400. That's 6 cores, 6 threads, a max boost clock of 4 gigahertz, and a base clock of 2.8 gigahertz. Now, in the real world, if you're having an all-core being slammed by performance tests, you're not going to be getting 4 gigahertz, more like 3.8. And I was able to find one on eBay for $34.99. Next, we're looking at the i7-8700. That's 6 cores, 12 threads, so now we're multi-threaded. A max turbo of 4.6 gigahertz, a base frequency of 3.2 gigahertz, and again, in the real world, you're not going to be seeing 4.6 in all-core load. You're going to be looking at more like 4.3 gigahertz. And I was able to find one on eBay for $72.25, which is substantially more expensive. So now for the Ryzen 3 1200, that's 4 cores, 4 threads, with a clock speed of 3.1 gigahertz and a boost of 3.4. I was able to find one on eBay for $24. This one actually comes with the stock cooler, so that's... Alright, so now we have the Ryzen 5 1600. That is 6 cores, 12 threads, so we're multi-threaded with this one. A base clock of 3.2 gigahertz and a boost of 3.6 gigahertz. And on AMD CPUs, when it says boost, you can just set it to run there. Alright, so now on the AMD Ryzen 5 1600, we were able to find one for $45, and once again, it comes with a stock cooler. This one looks kind of gnarly. Now for the AMD Ryzen 7 1700, 8 cores, 16 threads, so this is our first 8-core CPU in this lineup. A base frequency of 3 gigahertz and a boost of 3.7. And I was able to find one on eBay for $39.99, which is cheaper than the Ryzen 5. But this doesn't come with a stock cooler, so maybe that's why. Alright, so how will I test this? Simulation. So I have a Ryzen 7 5800X, I have a Radeon 9070 XT. I'm not going to buy all of these CPUs and motherboards to test all of this components with. So what I will do is I'm going to limit my core count, thread count, and clock speed on my CPU in order to best simulate what these CPUs would do. A note, now this will not be a perfect test of these systems because my cores are stronger than their cores and my CPU has more cache. But for the purposes of just testing, this will give us a good idea of what those processors. Alright, as you can see, we are simulating the i3 right now. I still have my 5800X, but we have 4 cores, 4 threads, set down to 3.6 gigahertz. Game. In the main menu here, we're getting about 300, 400 FPS. CPU's at 100%, graphics cards at 100%, but this is just the main menu. Let's see how it does in-game. Alrighty, so we made it into the game here. As you can see, we're getting about 170, 100, up to 200 on a black screen there. Never mind how terrible at this I am. The purpose of this is not to just enjoy the gameplay, it's to look at the frame rate. I really suck at this game, but that's okay. So between 130, 150 FPS in most places. Small hitch there. Alright, so the next CPU we're simulating here is the i5-8400. As you can see, we have 6 cores, 6 threads, and now we're at 3.8 gigahertz. Alright, we made it into the main menu. Now we are constantly above 400 FPS. Our CPU utilization is at around 70%. Alright, so now we are in the low to semi-high, mid 200s, so that is substantially better than the i3. 265 there, 250, 300, 260, 280. All right, now we're testing out the i7. 6 cores, 12 threads at 4.3 gigahertz. So this is our first multi-threaded CPU of the test today. All right, and in the main menu, it's about the same FPS as before, but our CPU utilization is much, much lower. But let's see what it looks like in the game. All right. So we are pretty consistently between the mid and high 200s. Oh, a bit of a drop there. Wow, quite a bit of a drop there. Seems to be running just fine, though. I mean, look over here. We're getting mid 300s. All right, so now we're going to be simulating the Ryzen 3 1200, 4 cores, 4 threads at 3.4 gigahertz. All right, so back in the main menu, our CPU is stuck at 100%, and we are not quite at 400 FPS. All right, and in-game, we have mid to high 100s right now. Oh, now we're dropping a bit. 120, 116, 105, 103. So this is our weakest showing yet. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still over 100 FPS in most places, but 96 there. Dang, that dude smoked me. Anyways, so now we have the Ryzen 5 being simulated. That's 6 cores, 12 threads at 3.6 gigahertz. So unlike the i5, this is actually multi-threaded, but it is clocked a little bit slower. All right, in the main menu, we have pretty consistently over 400 FPS. The CPU's at 46-47% utilization. Let's see what it is in game. Frame rate's not as good as the i5. You know, with the multi-threading, I was kind of expecting a better performance, but I guess just the raw speed of the cores matters more in this game. $140, $160, $150, $130. Whereas our i5 was pretty consistently much higher than that. All right, now we're simulating the Ryzen 7. That's 8 cores, 16 threads, clocked at 3.7 gigahertz. Alrighty, so in the main menu, we're well above 400 now. CPU utilization is down to around 30%. Let's see what it looks like in game. All right, so loading in down here. Low to mid 200s while we're standing here. FPS wise, this is kind of on par with that i5, which is kind of surprising to me. We have so many more cores and we're multi-threaded. Yep. Well, all right. So for our results, the i3 8100 got an average of 130 to 150 FPS with a 1% lows, average around 60. The Ryzen 3 1200, it got an average between 110 and 130. 1% lows average was the high 60s. So as far as I could tell from reviewing the footage, our 1% lows were actually a little bit higher than the i3. So the i5 8400, that got an average of between 220 and 240 FPS, 1% lows average around 110. For the Ryzen 5 1600, we were looking at an average of 150 to 190 FPS, 1% lows around 80 FPS. For the i7 8700, our average FPS was 240 to 280. Our average 1% lows were around 115. For the Ryzen 7 1700, our FPS average was 210 to 235, with 1% lows averaging around 110. So kind of on par with the i5 in gaming rather than the i7. Alright, so now we're going to test the productivity of these. I'm just going to run Cinebench once for each setup that we have here, and it's going to take a long time, so I'll just cut straight to the results. Alright, so here's the results. Our i3 8100 got 245 points. The Ryzen 3 1200 got 249. These two are really within spitting distance of each other. On paper, the i3 should actually do a little bit better, but there's a little bit of variance between just one run to another in Cinebench. For the i5 8400, we got 431 points. For the Ryzen 5 1600, we got 522, so pretty substantial jump there. The i7 8700, we got 614 points. For the Ryzen 7 1700, we got 715 points. Now I'm going to show you how much you would spend if you wanted to build one of these systems for yourself. I'm going to have prices for each spec of it, but the different specs will share some parts, like the case, 16 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM, 500 watt PSU, storage, both an SSD and a hard drive, literally any monitor and TV, a keyboard and a mouse, and some fans for that case. There you can see all the prices, the cheapest that I was able to find them on eBay. Now for the non-shared parts, for Intel, the motherboard, the cheapest I could find was $65. That is a B360M. For the Ryzen, I was able to find it for about 70 bucks. It's a B450M. Now it costs a little bit more, but on AMD Ryzen, you actually have a much more substantial upgrade path than the Intel Core series. Because on that Intel board, the best upgrade that you can get from the 8th generation is the 9th generation. Whereas on AM4, that board there for AMD, you have the 1000 series, the 2000, the 3000, the 4000, and the 5000 that all fit in that socket. So there's a lot of headroom for upgrades. As far as coolers go, the Intel stock cooler, cheapest I could find it was for about 10 bucks. It's fine for all of them, but maybe the i7, because that would probably start to overheat a little bit under the stock cooler, at least in my experience with these CPUs. AMD Ryzen stock cooler, cheapest I could find it was for $11. That's fine for all of them, but the Ryzen 7 for the same reasons. And for those two higher end chips, we have the Thermalright Assassin. Alright, so now graphics cards. This is kind of an elephant in the room. If you're building a system like this, you're going to need a graphics card. But I can't really find a good way to build that price into my totals because there are different price brackets of graphics cards. So I've given you an NVIDIA and AMD option for each price tier that I would give for this. So our first graphics card in there is a GTX 1060 6GB. Cheapest I could find that for was about 50 bucks. From AMD, you have the RX 580. It's an 8 gig card, but the cheapest I could find that was for around $80. And the card itself is around 16% slower, so it's a bad value. For the next tier up, we have a GTX 1080 8GB. The cheapest I can find those is for around $100, between 50 and 90% faster than a 1060. For the AMD equivalent, we have the Vega 64 8GB. Cheapest I could find that for was about 90 bucks. It's around 10% slower than a 1080, so that's kind of just tracked linearly. Now, the next price bracket, we have an RTX 2080 8GB. Cheapest I could find that for was $150. It's only between 10 and 20% faster than the 1080 in raw rasterization power, but it ray traces. For the AMD quote-unquote equivalent is the RX 6700 XT 12 gig. The cheapest I could find one was $250, and it's only around 6% faster than a 1080, so that is very bad value, but I wanted to include it for you guys to see anyways. And then just a note, higher-end GPUs will likely require a bigger power supply. I didn't factor that into these builds. They all have a 500-watt power supply, but if you went with something bigger, like you might be able to get away with like a 1080 with a 500-watt power supply, but definitely not a 2080. So just keep that in mind. Alright, so our first build here, the Intel i3. As you can see, we have the motherboard that we'll need. We have the stock cooler. And we have the i3 added to the cost of all the shared parts there for a total price of $331. Performance versus the Ryzen 3. Gaming was superior. Productivity was near identical. Now for the Intel i5. Again, board, stock cooler, and the CPU itself. The total price comes out to $346. Its performance versus the Ryzen 5. Gaming was superior. Alright, so now the Ryzen 5. Motherboard, stock cooler came with the CPU. CPU's price itself added in. Performance versus the i5. Gaming was inferior. Productivity was superior. Alright, now we have the i7. So now instead of the stock cooler, I've priced in the Thermalright Assassin. And total build price came out to $395. In gaming, it was superior. In productivity, it was pretty far inferior. The Ryzen 7. Once again, Thermalright Assassin cooler. Total price came out to $365 versus the i7. Gaming was inferior, but productivity was far superior. And honestly, the cost of this and the cost of the i5 system is pretty close. So if you were considering buying the i5 system or the parts for it, I'd recommend that you go with the Ryzen 7 instead, because then you get better productivity and near the same gaming performance anyways, but then you also have a better upgrade path. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe. And thank you for watching.